Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to another mod with me, where we create a deep and meaningful bond with the cards through creative expression and deck modification. So today we are going to be taking all the borders off the Mystic Dreamer Tarot. Now this is actually a deck that, well, now it's new to my collection. It was sent to me by a friend who had asked me if I would help her and trim the borders off this deck because she doesn't like all of this, just all of this graphic border that's on here. It is a lot, I gotta say. I kind of agree with her. It's a lot. There's a lot of texture going on. You have the image overlaid the top with this really dark drop shadow behind it. You have the textured border here. You have another texture of the paper. There's also an overlay of a kind of, looks like maybe Celtic type of symbol behind it. You have the lines. You have the little decoration at the top and bottom. You have this fancy font. You have the number. Not to mention that the images themselves are very layered because it is photo collage digital artwork. And so you've got all of that layering going on within the image itself. And then you add all of that layering going on in the borders. And I do have to agree with her. It's just a little much for this deck. And I am really curious to see how it's going to look trimmed. I do also have a copy for myself now because she so kindly gifted me a copy as well. So I jokingly said, at least if I mess this one up, I have another one that I can fix for her. But I think it will go just fine. Again, the back's the same kind of layering effect going on. I do believe that the borders are pretty close on the sides. And I can tell you by just looking at it, there is more of a border on the right side than there is on the left. So we'll have to keep that in mind when we're trimming. The tops are... there's a little bit more border on the top than there is on the back of the cards than there is on the front. And of course, with this big title down here, we're definitely going to be cutting into the image. And I think that that's going to be okay. I think it'll look all right because we are going to end up cropping down to this image here. So that's kind of just a look at what I'm going to be doing with this because this is definitely a deck that there are no straight lines like anywhere on this card or on these cards. We're definitely going to have to use some measurements, which is totally fine because that is something that I enjoy doing anyway. So we're basically just going to go through our basic process. I'm going to use my measurements. I'm going to trim all the sides of the deck at once, and then we'll go through, we'll take a look at the process, and then I'm going to go ahead and edge this deck for her as well. So that's the plan for today, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So let's talk about my tools for today. I have my Fiskars trimmer. I have, of course, the deck that I'll be trimming. In addition, I have my Kadomaro corner rounder that we'll be using to round the corners of the deck when we're done trimming it. And I also have a new addition to my trimming process here. I have this triangle ruler and some washi. Actually, washi is not a new addition because I use washi all the time for measuring things. But if you haven't watched any of my more recent mods, I've been using this little triangle to create a guide on my left side of my cuts so that my cards aren't shifting around so much. And that's been working really wonderfully. And it's also making the process go a lot faster than it normally does because I'm not spending so much time trying to measure everything up. Basically what I do, this one has a bevel on one side, so I try to be really careful to make sure that I'm always putting the flat side against my board. And I'm just using this 90-degree angle here to line it up against the top, and then that creates a guide here that my card can butt up against so that as my trimmer goes through my card, it's not shoving my card one side or the other. I apologize if you can hear the birds. My kiddo is gone today and they are throwing a fit. And the washi, of course, is to tape everything down to keep it from moving. Because I do one side at a time, it allows me to make a measurement on one side and cut all 78 cards at once at that same measurement. So I'm not constantly having to readjust my measurements. When you do that, it also gets you a much, much straighter cut, which if shuffling is a consideration for you once you've trimmed a deck, I highly recommend using the measurements because that's what gets you this more uniform look, and it does affect the shuffling. So the first thing that I'm going to do is get my measurements going. This deck does not have an extra card. There are only the 78 cards, so you know, sometimes you get a bonus and there's an extra card and you can use that for measuring. However, I do want to point out that if you have an extra card, do note that a lot of times on the extra cards, the borders aren't quite the same as they are on the rest of the deck because it's missing a lot of the components. It's just a title card, so it doesn't have the title areas for the names of the cards and things of that nature, and sometimes the borders can be different as well. So that is just something to keep in mind in case you are using the title card. I have found in several cases where I've used my title card for my measurements to set up my initial measurements, only to find out that the borders are slightly different on the title card. So the first thing that I'm going to try to do, it's always helpful if I can find a main line, but I want to make sure that I'm getting off all of this little raggedy edges here. So to start with, I'm actually going to washi the card down. Now, another little trick that I found is that this metal ruler of mine, the width of it, and I think I've mentioned this in every trimming video, so I apologize if it's something you've heard 900 times, but in case this is your first Mod With Me video, I just want to point out that this little width of my ruler here is the exact same width of the excess between the guard and the blade. So there is a, however big, we know I'm not good at math, so I'm not even going to try. But this distance between this guard and this blade is the exact same width as my ruler. So I can use this to kind of give me an idea of where my blade is going to hit, because it's actually not going to be where this guard is. And that's something that it took me a little while to get the hang of when I first started trimming, and every trimmer is different. So this is like I want to say the fourth type of trimmer that I've had. I've had this one for a long time now, and it's the one that I always use. I found that it works the best for me, but I've had a lot of other ones, and the variations between the guard and the blade are always different. So it's really important to get to know what the variation is for your particular trimmer. So I know for me, with this trimmer, I have to pay attention to looking at the other side of this ruler to see where it's going to cut. And I'm looking, and it's looking like I'm probably going to get most of the little border off if I go that route. Sometimes I try to make sure to get this corner down because sometimes the cards, particularly if they're thin, and these are quite thin, although I like Llewellyn cardstock, so I'm not complaining, but they are a bit thinner, so sometimes those thinner cards can slip right under that little guide that I've made. So I like to kind of get my corners down as good as I can. But I also try to make sure that my washi is not in the way. So I don't want my washi to create a false guide. So I want to keep it, make sure that it's there to keep it down, but also make sure that it's not getting in the way. I know a lot of little technical details. You thought trimming cards was just taking a pair of scissors to the cards, right? Nope, I take it to a whole nother level. All right, let's make our first cut and see how we did. Like I said, I'm pretty confident with this one because I have a second copy that was really supposed to be for me, but if I totally screw this up, it is going to my friend. But I think that worked out beautifully. I got all of the little pieces of the border off, and I got a nice clean cut there. So I think that line is going to work really well. So now I'm just going to repeat the process. I do kind of check these first few cards pretty carefully just to make sure that I'm still getting, a nice clean cut. And then I can kind of move through the process a bit quicker, particularly with this guide here, because I don't have to reset and remeasure for every single card. It just is creating this nice little guide. And thus the reason I use this on every deck I trim now. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and quit babbling and trim up the right side of this deck, and then we'll take a look and see what it looks like at that point. Okay, so I got all of the right side cut off the deck, and hopefully you can see it came out pretty well. It's pretty straight. This one was not. That one looks like the corner, the end of it got away from me. did. You can see I just took a sliver off of it there. That's a great way to tell if your deck is straight, is just kind of line them up on the uncut side, and you can kind of pick out cards that are a little bit off. Sometimes if I'm not putting enough pressure on the bottom, the trimmer has a tendency to kind of kick back a little bit, and the card has a tendency to shift around. And you also need to make sure that you're bringing your arm straight down. You can see there I was able to trim that little slice off. And like, if you really want to nitpick it, you could do that all day long with this. Because you're cutting by hand, it's never going to be 100% perfect. But if you want to get it pretty close, that's a great way to do it. I always just go pretty close. Pretty close is good for me. This is still straight enough that it's going to shuffle really well. So now I'm basically going to flip the deck around, and I'm going to repeat the whole process on the other side. Okay, so I've got the entire deck trimmed down, the two sides and the top, and I've left just the bottoms here so that you can take a look and see if that's maybe something that you might want to do if you have this deck and are thinking about trimming it. It does leave quite a bit of a big border along the bottom, but I mean, it doesn't look too bad like this, I don't think. If I were going to leave it like this for myself personally, I think that what I would do is probably cut this portion off here. So this is clear, so you're not going to really tell, but I think if I were going to leave the titles, I would cut that off right there. Just that little sliver, just to kind of clean up that border down there. And maybe I'll do it on my copy just to see what it looks like. But for her copy, she wants it completely borderless, so we're going to go ahead and cut the bottoms off now. You can see here the tops do still have some of the little raggedy parts up here. You know, I could have flipped it around and I could have trimmed more of the top off, but that's, again, taking, you know, quite a bit of another little sliver off, and that's just making the deck smaller and smaller. So I decided to just go ahead and leave it. I think it's going to make it look okay. This deck isn't going to be reversible in terms of the back anyway, because by the time I cut into this much of the back, you can see here, I'm going to be cutting off like that much of the card. So the deck is already not going to be really reversible in terms of the back, because I'm going to have to cut off part of the head here and part of this little bubble design. And so the fact that I left a little bit of this on there, for me, that works okay. Hopefully it works okay for her too, because I'd rather retain more of the front of the image, and I don't want to be accidentally like cutting into these pentacles. So if I cut this one, you know, I would actually be cutting into this pentacle up here. Not that it's a huge deal, but these are just little things that, you know, you might want to keep in mind when you're trimming a deck. You know, what is the most important parts that you want to retain? For me, I always want to retain as much of the image as I possibly can, because that's the most important part of the card, right? At least for me anyway. And so I always try to maintain as much of that as possible. If that means that, you know, my backs have to be a little bit, retain a little bit of the border, that's okay. If this were a white border, that would be a different story though, right? But this is a design, and I think it's going to look okay because it's just the hint of it. It's not the full on huge design like we had before. So anyway, that's just kind of some things to keep a lookout for when you're trimming a deck. So I'm basically going to just go back, repeat the same process, and I'm going to go ahead and show you on this first card just so that we can see this deck completely borderless. I do think it's going to be really cute. We've been messaging back and forth as I've been doing this, and I think that she's going to be really happy with the way that it turns out. So now that I've got that in there, we're going to go ahead and always make sure your blade is all the way up. I cannot tell you how many times I've come in here and my blade's been down just a little bit, and I've put it in here, not realizing that it is slightly off because it's not all the way flush against the top. Just another little tip from me to you of mistakes I have made, so hopefully you won't make them too. So there we go. I've cut that title off. And now look at this card. That is actually really cute. This is one of those decks that when I first saw it, and even when we were chatting about it, and I was like, I don't know, I don't have it. And she's like, I know it's the photo manipulation deck, if a photo collage deck basically, and I know that's not your favorite, and we kind of chatted about that, which is kind of funny, but I do gotta tell you that I felt like that shifted, but it didn't. I do have to tell you that the more that I am working with this deck as I'm trimming it, the more I'm actually liking it. And I think it's really the color palette in this deck that I like. Although it has the super young kings and queens, which, drives me crazy. But I think because the people in this deck are super small. I mean, look at these guys. They're like tiny. They're like 2 inches big. And because the people are smaller and the background, the landscape is more, for me, more front and center with this deck, I do kind of like it a little bit more than I thought I was going to. So I'm actually kind of excited that I got a copy too. And so I can trim it and I can give it a try because I think it's the color palette. I do really like this moody landscape. I know I'm totally going off topic here, but I like the colors and I like the moody landscape. It reminds me a little bit of the Thelema. So I think it's going to be like, by the time I finish trimming, it's going to be like a pocket size Thelema type deck, which actually might be kind of cool. Okay, so here's a couple of the cards now trimmed up, completely borderless. And I think they are actually looking pretty cool. So the backs, here's what our backs are looking like. And as I said, because this is a gigantic border, I had to cut into the head. So we have a little bit of the head cut off and a little bit of the top remaining. Which means that, of course, if you work with reversals in terms of your cards, this deck is not reversible anymore. It was before, but it's not now. But I think that it will work okay and it's really pretty. So I hope that she's going to like it. I think it's pretty cool. I cannot wait to get it corner rounded and edged and see the final product. So I'm going to quit babbling, finish trimming these up, and then we will get on to the next portion of this process. Okay, so I've got the entire deck trimmed and corner rounded, and I think it looks actually pretty cool. I think it came out really great. I like the borderless look of it now. It's the images really pop as they tend to do when you take off those gigantic borders. The backs look okay. Again, not going to be totally reversible, but I think it actually works fine. It's not obnoxious or anything. I did end up using the small side of my corner rounder just because, again, this is now a very small deck. I mean, you can see like it fits in the palm of my hand. It's cute. I really like it. I love a small deck. You can do bigger spreads with it. It's pocket size. You can carry it around. So for me and for my friend, that's really great because we both really think it's a cute little deck now. So now is the time that we come to the fun color part because now that I've trimmed it, I am going to go ahead and edge it. So we talked a little bit about color, and what I had in mind was to do kind of this dark moody to kind of pick up these colors that we see here in the back, and I think that will also work really well with the colors on the front because this is kind of a deck with those kind of darker, moodier colors. So what I did was I took about halfway through the deck, corner rounding it. My hand gets a little bit tired. This is really... I don't want to say thin because it's not super thin. It's the thinner Llewellyn cardstock, which I really like. So I'm not complaining at any rate. But it's pretty easy to corner punch. But even after, about halfway through, my hand gets a little bit tired. So I always just take a little break. And so what I did was I took some of the titles. You can see I just took a selection of those. And I took about 3 in groups, and I just tried some different layering techniques. I don't know if I can get those. I don't know if I can get those to show up on the camera because, of course, it's tiny. I'm just working with this little sliver of a card, but I did some just kind of playing with some different techniques and some different colors. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing of what I ended up doing. And what I ended up deciding to go with was the deck edged in Crayola Gray as my base. And I don't know this because I only have 3 cards here. It's not going to show up on camera. So we'll just take a look when I get about halfway through maybe. And what I did was use the Crayola Gray as a base, and then I used the Distressed Ink Shabby Shutters very lightly over the top just to give that hint of green in there that we see on the back of the cards. And I really like the look of that, so that's what I decided to go with. I love working with Crayolas because they're really quick and easy. They don't bleed. And it's a great color base. However, sometimes the Crayolas can rub off on your hand. This is me actually writing on my hand because, you know, I was doing these little itty bitty slivers, so I ended up writing on my hand. But sometimes the Crayolas can. They are a washable marker. I'm not going to go into it because I've gone into it in many, many, many other videos. But when I have the opportunity to overlay a more permanent ink over the top of a Crayola, then that works really well because the Crayola goes on really quick and easy. It makes a nice base color, and then you can add in the accents with the more permanent inks. The stamps work particularly well for that. I like the Tim Holtz Distressed inks to add because they don't fill. The distressed inks are not designed to be a color fill. Like if you want it to fill, you have to do multiple coats. So if you just put one coat in, it's kind of a spotty, you know, distressed look. And while I'm sitting here babbling, I should just start edging. But anyway, I like to do that because it fills that, kind of adds that hint of color, but doesn't completely wash over the color that you have for your base color. So I tend to use that a lot. The Brilliance, the gold stamps, those work really well too. So for this process, all I'm going to do is I'm going to run a line of the gray over the top of or on the sides of my deck. I do always just give it a little wipe because you just never know if it's going to run anywhere. Crayola usually doesn't, and I do edge with the backs facing me. I don't know why that one was turned around the wrong way. Just in case I do accidentally I oops on the back of the card and not the front. But I'm doing a fairly light coat, and I'm running the paper towel along the edge just to take off all the extra. That's the problem. I've got it turned the wrong way. And then I'm going to, after I get the gray on all of these cards, I'm going to go over it with a very light coat of the green. That does mean that I am essentially edging every card twice. So I'm basically doing, you know, 2 times the edging job. However, there are very few decks that I've ever edged that I haven't had to do at least 2 coats. So I figure if I'm going to do 2 coats, I might as well do 2 coats in a layered effect and to kind of give it a cool look. And rather than just filling it in with one solid color, it's just fun and it gives some interest to the cards. And I like when I can match the backs like that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the base coat of the gray, and we'll come back and see what that looks like. Okay, so I thought we'd just do a quick check-in. I have edged about half the deck, or a little more than half the deck, in the Crayola Gray. And I think that actually this color on its own looks really cool and really good with the back of these cards. Let me just pull one up here. I think that on its own really actually works, but I really want to add that little hint of green in there for her. So I'm going to add that next. So you can see here, big difference. Anytime you edge a deck, it's usually a big difference, makes a wonderful transformation. So now that I've edged that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to finish up doing these ones in the base gray, and then I'm going to do half the deck in the green with the green overlay so that you can see the two compared together, because that might help you to be able to see what the difference is going to be. So I'm going to set those ones aside for right now, and I'm just going to finish up edging this side in the gray. And then, like I said, I'll add the layer of green over this, and then we'll come back and see, so that hopefully when I put the two sides together, you can see what the overlay of the distressed ink does to the Crayola marker. Okay, so I've got half the deck edged with the green overlay to it. And now you can see when I put them up together, you can really see the difference. You can really see that green coming through, which matches the backs, I think, really well. And you still get the hints of the gray coming through. And of course, I could leave this gray and that would totally work as well. But I like that pop of green, just pulling in that kind of dark, moody color. And it works really well, I think, with the imagery on the front. There are a couple places on the corners where I need to touch up because that is always the case. And I will probably do that with the gray, just to pull that gray color in a little bit more. And then I think it's going to be really wonderful when it's all finished. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up doing the green on this side, touching up my corners, doing all that little finish work on the deck, and then we'll take a look at the completed project. Okay, we are all done with this wonderful mod, and this time I actually have 2 copies of the deck. So I have my copy here, which I haven't trimmed yet, and then I have my friend's copy, so we can actually see the difference between the two, and this is always fun when I get a chance to do that. So I've just pulled out a couple of the first major arcana here, so we can see the big difference between the cards. So here is the original, and now we have the little trimmed version. And I think this version looks really cool. You can definitely see that there is a huge size difference now. So I've taken off quite a bit of the card, and I've gotten it down to this little pocket size. But look at the difference here. Look how pretty that is. I'm definitely going to be trimming my deck as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at the Magician here. So here's the original, and here's our trimmed copy. And I think this looks really cool. So here's what the backs end up looking like. You know, a little off on the trimmed version, but I think it works okay. So I just wanted to show you the difference between the two, because I do, you know, have this one now. So you can definitely see there's a huge difference. Now let's take a look at this trimmed copy, the one that we've modified, to see the sides of it now, because I have finished edging it. And it is in that kind of dusty gray-green color, which I think looks really great with the backs of the cards. So you can see it here. It picks up along the side, which is always lovely. And it's definitely like that multi-layered. It definitely shows up more in person probably than it does on camera, but I think it looks a little bit more green on camera than it actually is in real life. But I think it matched the backs, ended up matching the backs beautifully. Let's see if I can lay one here beside it. So you can see it's definitely picking up the variations and the different grays and greens in there. So I think that's really pretty. So there you have it. That is the completely trimmed, totally borderless new Mystic Dreamer Tarot. And here is the original version. So you can see there's quite the size difference there. But I think it looks fantastic. Thank you for joining me for this mod with me. You'll find links for the decks and products that I've used in this video in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this process and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.